daydream, find our true selves in this moment revealed. Thank you, everybody. My name's Stephen, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be here with all of you jamming on this stage today. The elements of the piece that you heard actually are from a new album, and the melody and the harmony and the tempo, as you probably guessed, came from my upbringing. In my case, musically speaking, that was rock, that was pop, and I'm not afraid to admit it, even a little disco. Now, these foundations really served as the roots, if you will, of not only my youth, but ultimately that which inspired me to become a musician. Now, interestingly, this concept of rootedness from a musical perspective was spoken about by the great Ray Charles. And Ray Charles said, "My music had its roots dug up from my childhood, musical roots buried in the darkest soil." Now, think about that for a second. Ray was onto something huge here. What he was reminding us is that we're all rooted. We're rooted in the communities that we're part of, be they our families, where we work, or the activities in our local town. We're rooted in how we communicate, whether it be in person or, yes, our favorite social media platform. We're rooted in how we see ourselves, and we're rooted in how we see the world. But one thing is common to all of these roots: our values. And so we have to ask ourselves, what are these values? Now, being the musician that I am, I love exploring concepts like this, looking at the great artists of our time. So I'd like to take a moment to explore some of the great artists and how they use their roots for the impact in their craft. Take, for example, the legendary Rolling Stones. So many times they're asked, what inspired you? How do you do what you do? And their answer comes back to their roots, which interestingly, as a British band, comes back to the American blues scene with artists such as Muddy Waters. Take the legendary Prince, who inspired so many of us. When asked about his roots, he talked about Stevie Wonder, Joni Mitchell, and many others. And my personal guitar hero, Eddie Van Halen, talked about Eric Clapton and early Cream records. What's interesting about all these artists is less the fact that they're musicians and more the fact that they had the impact they did precisely because of their roots. And we can argue none of us need to be musicians to have impact in our lives. It's more about connecting to our roots. So to speak to that, I'd like to share a quick example of how my roots were formed early on and the impact that they had on me. The year was 1977, and yours truly was a mere 5 years old. After a little bit of horseplaying with my older brother, I suddenly experienced a sharp pain in my left arm. My parents quickly realized this was no childhood injury that was normal, so they took me to a series of tests throughout our state. And after a painful series of experiences, the doctor came back with a very grim diagnosis. I actually had a malignant tumor coming in my left arm. When my parents asked what the diagnosis for treatment might be, they shook their heads and said there are only two. One, we operate successfully and remove this tumor, or two, we have to amputate your son's arm. My parents, of course, were devastated and shocked, and yet in this moment, what got them through were in fact their roots. In their case, their roots involved faith and connection to community, and that's exactly what they did to get them through. Now, my age, I was only 5, but in this very pivotal moment, I started to connect to my roots. I made a promise to myself in this moment before the surgery that if my arm were saved, I would find some way to use this arm to give back to others. The next day, the surgeon completed the surgery and went to my parents and gave the good news is that successfully the tumor had been removed. My parents rejoiced, and although I was 5, I recognized in that moment one day I would find a way to make good on that promise, to give back and serve others. Many years later, when I was in middle school, I had the opportunity to start to make good on that promise, and I discovered my passion for music. I learned to play guitar, I learned to play trumpet, I learned to play piano, and through that, I was able to pay back this promise to serve others. I had the opportunity to play for everybody from kindergartners all the way to senior citizens, with rock bands and jazz bands, and yes, a disco band. And many years later, I had the opportunity to build on this concept of giving back, playing and using music as a way to help amplify corporate teams and their communication and their collaboration. And as we did this, interestingly, we kept coming back to this core concept of what made the best organizations powerful, and it was these roots. So as we work with teams, we kept getting the same question: why are values important, and how do we use them, and what are they? So as we work with these teams, we actually did our own research, and we found that Harvard Business Review did a study on this very question. They measured the top 1,000 organizations throughout the world, And you know what they found that separated the top organizations? One thing. They had shared values, values that were working in harmony. So if we understand that values are important, we still need to ask the next question, which are, what are values? Well, musically speaking, I like to liken them to a chord that make up the underpinnings of your favorite song. Because values ultimately answer the following questions. Who are we? What do we believe? And what's the impact we want to make? Much like an anthem in your favorite song. So we've asked the question, why are they important? We've asked the question, what are they? But we still have to answer the most important question, which is, how do we get clear on these roots and how do we bring them to life, especially when life isn't going so well? Because let's face it, sometimes life brings us some dissonant notes. Think about, for example, let's say conflict within a family. Perhaps the younger individual who's just graduated high school wants to go and travel the world, but their parents want them to go to school. And together it sounds like this. So the question is, how do we get underneath these dissonant notes to hear the values that are going on? Perhaps the young one explores and values freedom and exploration, and yet the parents value education. The question is, how do we go from those dissonant notes to find common harmonic roots? Or let's take a work example. Take, for example, those of us that like to work remotely, and those of us, particularly the employers, who want everybody to work in person. Now, together, those might sound like this. But what we can do is get deeper and go to the deeper values and roots to find some true harmony. So with this process, I'd like to ask the question, how can we get clear on bringing these dissonant notes into harmony? And I'd like to share a 3-step process that all of us can use, whether we're musicians or not. The first step starts with listening. The most important thing that all of us can do is to listen. Now, to get clear on our values, it starts with listening to our own instrument, much like this. We have to ask ourselves, what do we believe? Who are we? And what kind of impact do we want to have in the world? And if we do that, we might start to hear our own notes like this. And after we've heard our own notes, that's important, but it's not enough. We have to listen to the notes around us, whether they be at home or in our workplace. And when we ask others in our ensemble, if you will, what are your notes? What are your values? We might hear this. Now, the third step of listening is we have to listen to those notes together and what they can create. And when we actually start to listen to how these notes can combine for power, we start to hear harmony. So the first step of this powerful process is to connect and listen to our notes, our values, and those around us. Now that's important, but it's not enough. The great legendary Victor Wooten said, "We are all musical, we just don't know it." And that speaks to the next step, which is learning how to compose. Every one of you, every one of us can be a composer, whether it be projects that you're working on at work, initiatives at home, or things that you want to do in the community. All we have to do is start building ideas together, much like a song. And then we put a rhythm together, figure out the kind of tempo that we want to bring to the world. And then we think about the volume we want to bring. And then we put a melody on top of it. So we've listened, we've composed, but we've not talked yet about the most important step, which is performing with impact. Now, the legendary Miles Davis said, "There are no wrong notes." Now, what he was getting at there is less important which notes you play, and it's much more important that you play the notes, and you play them authentically from your roots. To that end, I'd love to tell a quick story of one of the greatest composers of our time who listened, composed, and led with impact. He was a young individual who was born in Georgia and later raised in Alabama. He was an amazing listener. He listened to his own notes, and he heard notes about justice and freedom and equality. Now, he was playing in a series of venues where there was a lot of dissonance. And he said, how can I start to compose with others? So he put together an ensemble, and together they started putting their own chords together and created an anthem around possibility and dreams. And then he performed with impact, literally marching and creating social justice for millions. That composer's name was Martin Luther King, Jr. And so with that as a backdrop, I'd like to leave you with the following question. How will you each, as composers, listen to the values that you have, listen to the values around you, co-create and co-compose your anthem, and then lead with impact? So to that end, you may now please pick up your shakers and join me in the final chorus of the song Daydream. Sound great. Daydream. You guys sound great. Thank you all. You guys rock. Thank you.